Just 6 more months until graduation, and I've got a job lined up. Do we really need her anymore? We don't, but at least until we inherit, she's still useful. I'd love to get rid of the trash as soon as possible though. Apparently, David was there too. Since we slept in separate bedrooms, I only realized at that moment that David was awake. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but I was frozen in place by their ominous conversation. Unaware that I was listening, they continued their heart-wrenching talk. For the next 6 months, I pretended I hadn't heard anything and acted normally. Then came the day of Michael's college graduation. He left early in the morning, looking eager and ready. Of course, there was no word of thanks for raising him, nor any invitation to a celebratory meal. All he said was, "I don't need dinner tonight," before heading out. Had I not overheard that conversation, I might not have minded, but knowing what I did, a simple word to me wouldn't have hurt. I figured he was going out for a meal with his biological mom and David. David also said he didn't need dinner. In the quiet room after they left, I sat alone with a pen and paper. My name is Sarah. I'm 55 years old. I've been living with my husband, David, and his son, Michael, for 20 years. David and I are both in our second marriages. I didn't get along with my ex-husband's family, which led to a mental breakdown and being discarded like trash by his parents. It was David who reached out to me during that difficult time. David and I were high school classmates. We weren't particularly close, but at a small reunion of close friends, David found out I was divorced and we exchanged contact information. At the time, David was a single father raising his 2-year-old son, Michael. Life isn't over for us yet, so let's give it our best shot. Those words from David were a great comfort to me. It didn't take long for us to understand each other, as we both had similar emotional scars, and eventually, we grew fond of each other. I was scared of getting married again, but David's persistence won me over, and I decided to give dating a chance. We remarried when I was 35. After the wedding, I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. Everyone around me advised against it, but since Michael was only 2 years old, I thought it was most important to spend time together and be accepted as part of the family. Michael was too young to remember much, and I loved children, so I wanted to give my all to raising him. Therefore, I didn't see any problem with marrying someone with a child. However, shortly after the marriage, I realized how naive my thinking was. Michael wouldn't eat or sleep well. He was so shy that he would cry just at the sight of me. I thought if nothing else, I just needed to wait until he warmed up to me, and I tried my best to become his mother. I stayed up with him through his night cries, and I devoted myself to playing with him during the day, but he still wouldn't open up to me. Seeing my distress, David said, "My ex was really beautiful. Maybe he just can't get used to your face." It was a thoughtless comment, but it hurt me deeply as a woman, wife, and mother. David continued to compare me to his ex-wife at every turn. "What kind of soup broth are you using?" My ex made better soup. One more unnecessary comment as he drank his soup. My ex was terrible at parenting. At least be better at that than her. He'd make it seem like he was putting down his ex, but he was really belittling me. Before we got married, he was always encouraging me, saying we should work together. After we married, he treated me like a slave. Despite my efforts, Michael never warmed up to me, and David's words were harsh. Many times, within the first year of our marriage, the thought of divorce crossed my mind. But I didn't want to be ridiculed by those around me with, "I told you so." I kept encouraging myself with the saying, "Never give up," and carried on with household chores and childcare. Michael never truly warmed up to me. He stopped crying at the sight of me but never smiled at me or called me mom. David and his family, and even strangers, received his affections, but for some reason, I seemed to be disliked. Despite this, I slowly grew to love Michael. I was happy to see him grow. "Don't come, Mom." When he started kindergarten, he reluctantly called me to Mom, but if I attended any events there, he would glare at me and send me away. Even when I consulted with Mr. Smith, his teacher, he said, "He's just being clingy," and offered no solutions. While I was happy to see Michael grow, our strained relationship troubled me. "You'll get used to it eventually." David dismissed my concerns, not really addressing them. One day, I asked Michael, Michael, I love you so much. What can I do for you to love me back? Michael looked surprised by my question. I sensed something was off, but I waited for him to speak. He opened his small mouth and said, Mom, do you really love me? Of course I do. You're lying. Dad said you hate me. I was shocked by Michael's words. David said that? What was going on? What do you mean? Did Dad say I hate you? Yes. I'm not stupid. You're a fake mom. You made my real mom leave. Michael stormed out of the living room. I was devastated. I had nothing to do with David's divorce from Michael's mother. Yet David blamed it all on me. Even as Michael grew older and still wouldn't open up to me, still calling me a fake mom, it was all because of David. That night, I confronted David. Michael called me a fake mom. I don't think he would know those words unless someone told him. No one else would say such things to him but you. But David responded unapologetically. I did say that, but it's not wrong, is it? Don't blame me for not being liked. I was too upset to say anything back. I still don't understand why David would say such things. Ultimately, my relationship with Michael never improved, and I grew more distant from David. But time waits for no one, especially a growing child. When we were preparing for Michael to start elementary school. Is this backpack okay? David pointed to an expensive, high-end backpack. I was taken aback by the price. It's nice, but isn't it a bit too expensive? Why don't you ask your parents to buy it as a gift? Huh? I tilted my head, not quite grasping what David meant. Your family is wealthy. They should be able to afford a gift for their grandchild's school entrance. David said this without noticing my bewilderment. Indeed, my family was financially well off. We owned real estate, and my grandfather had once been listed among the wealthy. It wasn't surprising that David, who went to the same high school as me, knew this before we got married. And it's not unusual for grandparents to buy such gifts. However, Michael and I are not blood related. In fact, Michael didn't even like me, so I had never taken him to my parents' house. For New Year's greetings, David would say, Michael and I don't need to go. We're not blood related to your parents. You can go alone. Using blood ties as a reason to refuse any interaction with my parents. Yet now he wanted them to buy an expensive backpack? There was no way I could ask for that. My parents had no attachment to Michael. I think that's a bit difficult. I declined David's suggestion with a strained smile. But David frowned. Why not? Just ask them. If they refuse, then it is what it is, and I'll reconsider our relationship with them. His condescending tone annoyed me. I held back the urge to ask, what do you mean by, it is what it is? Of course, I couldn't burden my parents like that. I secretly bought the backpack with money I had saved from before my marriage, planning to pass it off as a gift from my parents. However, my parents unexpectedly offered to buy the backpack. Where I grew up, it was common for the maternal grandparents to give such gifts. If Michael's biological mother's family or David's family planned to give him one, I wouldn't want to overstep, but you're his mother, Sarah, so. My mother's words warmed my heart. There was someone who recognized me as Michael's mother. When I felt like giving up, my mother was always on my side. Thank you. It doesn't need to be expensive. Just choose one that Michael will find easy to use. I thanked her, my voice choked with emotion. And soon after, a brand new, plain black backpack arrived. Michael's eyes lit up as he eagerly tried it on. However, David frowned at Michael's delight. What's this? It's too plain. But the store said this style is popular. It's lightweight and durable. Since Michael is small, a heavy one wouldn't suit him. I don't care about the weight. It lacks a high-end feel. David continued to criticize the backpack we had been so grateful to receive. Michael, who had been so happy, quietly put the backpack down after hearing David's words. After that, he never looked at it again. A similar situation occurred when Michael entered middle school. Luxury brand sports bags and shoes for school. He begged my parents for them as a celebration gift. By then, Michael, who had been influenced by David, started mocking me on his own. "Good thing you married Dad just because your family is rich," he'd sneer. Surely, David must have been feeding those ideas to Michael. I had turned a blind eye to it, but by this point, I clearly understood. David married me for my family's money and to secure someone to take care of Michael. Yeah. Stop saying silly things and get to your studies. By now, I had given up on being liked by Michael. Even if he called me a fake, I felt it was my duty to raise him as his mother. If I left and divorced David, he would be left alone with Michael. It would be tough for Michael. Being his mother might not have made him happy, but my feelings of affection for him were genuine. That's why I wanted to ensure he didn't struggle. Michael eventually graduated high school and entered college. When it came time for college, David suggested we ask my parents for financial help. "Your parents should pay for their grandchild's tuition. The money will eventually be yours, so it's better spent on Michael now." But asking my parents for such a large sum was out of the question. This wasn't like asking for a backpack or a sports bag. I knew David would make snide remarks if my parents didn't help. So, I used the alimony I had received from my first divorce to cover the tuition. I had other plans for that money, but I used it for Michael's education, pretending it was from my parents. Thanks to that, Michael was able to attend college for 4 years. He got a job offer, and graduation was just around the corner. Even though we hadn't built a good relationship, I felt like I had fulfilled my role by seeing him grow up. One night, I woke up and got up to go to the bathroom. I noticed a light on in the kitchen. I figured Michael had come home from drinking and went to check on him. I heard voices as I approached the kitchen. Just 6 more months until graduation, and I've got a job lined up. Do we really need her anymore? We don't, but at least until we inherit, she's still useful. I'd love to get rid of the trash as soon as possible though. Apparently, David was there too. Since we slept in separate bedrooms, I only realized at that moment that David was awake. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but I was frozen in place by their ominous conversation. "Trash, huh?" Michael repeated David's words and laughed. "Yeah. After graduation, let's go out for a family dinner. I'll treat with my part-time job money." I lifted my head at that comment. But then, I was thrown back into despair. Actually, I invited Mom to the graduation ceremony. She used to come to school events when I was in elementary school. But I haven't invited her recently. I thought she should be there for the last one. Oh, really? You're a good son. I'm looking forward to our family time. It was a casual conversation about inviting his biological mother to dinner. There was nothing wrong with it, and I didn't raise Michael expecting anything in return. But I had been rejected from attending every school event and milestone since kindergarten. Even when I expressed a desire to attend his college graduation, I was told, parents don't attend college graduations, so I gave up. But to think that he had been inviting his real mother since elementary school. She didn't raise him or pay for his education, just gave birth to him, yet she was getting all the credit. David must have facilitated their communication, but he never considered my feelings. Even though I tried to accept it, Michael's words about preferring his real mother over me cut deeply. Well, I do appreciate Sarah, but she's not family. When I was divorced, I wondered how I would raise you up. But having a housekeeper like her was helpful. Yeah, her cleaning and laundry were good, but I wish her cooking was better. The lunches were terrible. I always had to figure out who to sell them to. At least you got to eat what you liked with that money. Their laughter echoed after those words. I stood there in shock, listening to their conversation. It was another shocking revelation. To think that Michael had been selling the lunches I made for him since middle school was too much. It was disrespectful to those who bought them and trampled on my feelings, as I made them with him in mind. I forced my numb legs to move and quietly left there. Listening to them ridicule me further would have broken my heart. 20 years of marriage. I had been raising Michael since he was 2 years old. Yet, he never once acknowledged me as family. I crawled into bed and cried. Then, I made a decision I had been contemplating for a long time. For the next 6 months, I pretended I hadn't heard anything and kept up appearances. Then, the day of Michael's college graduation arrived. He left early in the morning, looking eager and ready. Of course, there was no word of thanks for raising him, nor any invitation to a celebratory meal. All he said was, "I don't need dinner tonight," before heading out. Had I not overheard that conversation, I might not have minded, but knowing what I did, a simple word to me wouldn't have hurt. I figured he was going out for a meal with his biological mom and David. David also said he didn't need dinner. I saw them off and sat alone in the quiet room, pen and paper in hand. Around 1 p.m., still early for them to return, my phone rang while I was having lunch outside. It was a call from David. I glanced at it, smiled slightly, and sipped my coffee. I had no intention of answering right away, letting it ring for a while. They must be in a panic on the other end. When I finally thought it was enough, I picked up my phone. "Hello? Sarah, where are you? What's with that note?" As expected, David was in a panic. Seeing the note meant he had returned home. "If I told you where I am, it wouldn't be a runaway. Everything's in the note." When I said that to David, he kept saying, but, well, unable to form a coherent sentence. Since the conversation was going nowhere, I sighed deeply. That's how it is. Once you've signed the divorce petition, file them. At that, David seemed to regain his composure, his voice growing firmer. I had left a note and the divorce petition behind. I won't accept a divorce. And what's this about unpaid tuition? That made me smile again. Clearly, the unpaid tuition worried him more than the divorce. "Oh. Aren't you supposed to be at work? How do you know about that?" David faltered. He had likely attended the graduation ceremony with Michael's biological mother. And he found out about the unpaid tuition there. Anyway, they said he can't graduate unless the outstanding tuition is paid by the end of the month. Tell your parents to transfer the money immediately. Why should I? Why should a mere housekeeper go to such lengths? My tone grew stronger, reflecting my true feelings. I'm a housekeeper, right? You've been brainwashing Michael to hate me since he was little. That's not true. He did warm up to you, and he called you a mom, didn't he? Don't lie. You made him call me that for appearance's sake. David fell silent. Anyway, I've already paid for 3.5 years of tuition. If you want him to graduate, you should at least pay for the last semester. With that, I hung up the phone. A few days after overhearing David and Michael mocking me, a tuition bill arrived in the mail. But after being called a mere housekeeper and used for my money, I couldn't bring myself to pay it. The university contacted me several times. According to their policy, if the tuition wasn't paid, Michael could attend the graduation ceremony as a prospective graduate. But if the payment wasn't made by the day of the ceremony, he would be expelled. In other words, the tuition of around $6,000 had to be paid that day. After I hung up on David, Michael called me. "Hey, you old hag. What's this about unpaid tuition? Why haven't you paid it?" Apparently, he wasn't with David at that moment. Otherwise, he wouldn't be speaking so confrontationally. Ask your father for the details. I don't plan to have anything more to do with both of you. Huh? What are you talking about? Goodbye, take care. Wait, hold on. I ended the call, cutting off Michael's words. From the day I heard that conversation, I had decided to leave them. I disappeared from their lives after that. My phone kept ringing all day. If they had time to call me constantly, they could have just paid the tuition. The next day, I changed my phone and number. 3 months later, I had to visit the city office for some paperwork and noticed that the divorce petition hadn't been filed yet. What had they been doing for 3 months? Feeling frustrated, I reluctantly returned to the house. The key still worked, so I let myself in, only to be greeted by a foul smell. Gross. What's that smell? It was the smell of rotting food. As I stepped into the living room, I saw the source. Lunchbox trash and instant noodle containers were scattered everywhere. The sink was full of dirty dishes. There were socks that looked like they'd been left for ages and piles of laundry, clean or dirty, I couldn't tell. In just 3 months, the house had turned into a garbage dump. It was expected, in a way. A house lived in by two men who did no housework. It was never going to stay clean. Still, I had hoped they would at least keep it somewhat tidy. Sarah. You came back. I heard someone calling my name. I shudder involuntarily. I turned to see David with a scruffy beard. What about work? I asked, and David reluctantly began to speak. Well, I got fired. What? Fired? I got caught taking money from the company's safe to pay for Michael's tuition. His words stunned me. You embezzled? For just $6,000. It's not embezzlement. They said they'd let me off if I returned the money. And we don't need to pay tuition anymore. So stop being stubborn and come back. Are you insane? I shouted at the top of my lungs. I always knew David was a foolish man, but this was beyond anything I could imagine. I already told you in the note that I'm cutting ties with both of you. But without you, I can't survive. Besides, it's your fault for not paying the tuition in the first place. I sighed deeply once again at David's defiant attitude. Please, come back. I love you. David was now begging and crying. He was saying words he had never said to me before. At this point, those false words of love meant nothing. You've always relied on others. Why don't you try to handle things on your own for once? I said with a half smile. The house was filthy, and so was David. A rustling sound drew my attention to an empty instant noodle container where a cockroach was poking its head out. In this state, Michael will probably leave too. At this rate, your only family will be the cockroaches. I laughed as I said this. David had no response, just hanging his head. Eventually, the divorce petition was submitted. 3 years passed in my new life. I finally felt like I had found happiness when I received some tragic news. My mother had passed away. At the funeral, as I sat quietly, two shadows approached me. I slowly lifted my head. Long time no see. You look better than I expected. It was David and Michael. David and I had many mutual acquaintances. They must have heard about my mother's death through the grapevine. Despite everything, Michael had received a lot of help from my mother but never showed any gratitude. Thinking they might have come to pay their respects, I felt a bit glad and said, "You guys came." "Of course. You were an only child, right? So you'll inherit her money, and eventually, as your child, I'll inherit it too. I should at least thank Grandma." "What?" I involuntarily scowl. Michael's outrageous statement made me feel disgusted. "What are you talking about? You have no right to any inheritance. But even if we're divorced, Michael is still our child," David said with a sly grin. Realizing they had come solely for the money made my blood boil. "Get out. If that's why you're here, I'd rather you not pay your respects at all." My voice was louder than I expected, drawing the attention of those around us. David and Michael, however, remained unfazed. But then, two figures approached, changing the situation. "What's the commotion here? What happened?" A man and a woman came to my side. Seeing them, David and Michael turned pale. "Ah. It's my ex-husband and his daughter." I introduced David and Michael to Chris and Aaron. They both frowned. David stammered. "Mr. Johnson. What are you doing here? Do you know Chris?" I asked David, but he didn't respond. Without waiting for his reply, I continued. "This is my husband, Chris, and our daughter, Erin." "What?" David and Michael looked up. They looked at me with a surprised expression. "Thank you for looking after my wife. You're David from the General Affairs Department, right?" "Yes." "Wait, what? David, you work at Chris's company?" I asked Chris, and he nodded yes. David's eyes darted around, looking panicked. "I'm not the one to mix business with personal matters, but if you keep hurting Sarah, I won't tolerate it." "That's not my intention," David mumbled. Michael remained silent, shrinking in on himself. Aaron spoke up. "I heard something about inheritance just now, Michael. You have no right to inherit." Her tone suggested she knew Michael. "So, you're the stepson my mom mentioned." Aaron laughed. Michael, who had always looked down on me with arrogance, seemed to shrink even further. I looked at Aaron curiously, and she explained. My mom has a biological daughter, which is me. So why would a stepson like you inherit anything? A biological daughter. Yes. I'm not a stepchild, I'm her real daughter. Did you think you were the only one and that you were special? Michael turned bright red. He had never considered that I might have a biological child. The truth is, Chris is my first husband. We had Aaron together, but I wasn't liked by Chris's parents. They took Aaron away from me. His parents' habit of saying was, consider that you have no child. I wasn't allowed to raise up Aaron. Chris always defended me, but his family ran a long-established company. He couldn't defy his father. I fell ill and reluctantly divorced him. Later, I heard that Chris raised up Aaron with great care. Despite the negative things her grandparents told her about me, thanks to Chris. Aaron grew up to be a kind-hearted person who sent me a letter once a year. I didn't have direct contact with Chris and Aaron during my marriage to David. However, Chris would bring Aaron to meet my parents, saying, she's still their granddaughter. So, I often heard about Aaron from my mother. I was always curious about Aaron, but I couldn't say I wanted to meet her while married. I poured all my love into raising Michael, but it felt more like a matter of perseverance than affection. After my divorce, Chris reached out. He had heard about my divorce from my mother. Chris never remarried and seemed to have always cared about me. By now, his parents, who had driven me away, had passed away. With his work stable, he proposed we remarry. I told David and Michael about my life after the divorce. So, Aaron is me and Chris's daughter. No way. David turned pale. Never did they imagine that the woman they used as a housekeeper was someone's cherished person. Did you ask me out because I'm the daughter of the president? Aaron asked Michael sharply. No, that's not it. But didn't David marry my mom just for my grandmother's money? I can't date someone like that. Michael looked devastated, hanging his head and wiping away tears. Apparently, Michael had asked Aaron out, though I didn't know how they met. Had Michael not been brainwashed by David, it might have been a happy relationship between the child I bore and the child I raised up. Unfortunately, Michael had become just like David. Indeed, dating someone like Michael would be troublesome. I couldn't help but agreed. My parenting was to blame. I'm sorry, Aaron. You deserve someone better. Michael, please stay away from Aaron and the money. Michael glared at me for a moment but had nothing to say in return. He was a victim of David, too, but he was an adult now. Without acknowledging his and his father's wrongdoings, he wouldn't find happiness. So, please leave. This is a place for family, and you don't belong here. Chris said, ushering them out. It was the perfect rebuttal, echoing the not family words they once threw at me. David continued working at Chris's company, feeling out of place. Despite hating working at my husband's company, at his age and with his previous dismissal reason, he had no other job options. Why did you hire him? Did you know about David? I asked Chris, who smiled. Of course. Keeping him under my watch ensures he won't harass you anymore. Chris's words warmed my heart. I hadn't realized it was for my sake. And there was more surprising news. It seems Michael cut ties with David. He must be reflecting on his actions and treatment to you. Michael had moved out and started living alone. Being rejected by Aaron, and realizing he wouldn't inherit a fortune, he finally understood that he needed to work hard for happiness. While I felt vindicated regarding David, I didn't wish unhappiness on Michael. Even though it was tough, I hoped he would grow and find happiness someday, proving I was his mother. I now live with Chris and Aaron. Chris's parents regretted their actions after they saw how depressed Chris and Aaron were after they forced me out. But by then, I had already remarried. And there was nothing they could do. I thought you had a happy life, Sarah. Chris said. There were happy times. I replied with a smile. But I think my happiest times are still ahead. Aaron is getting married soon. I want to live a long life, turning past hardships into stories we can laugh about, and continue to grow as a person.